So, welcome back to 3rd Age Reforged and to the Eastern Wastes. I believe this was actually a map that was called the Gap of Khand? I might be wrong about that, but I know that it's sort of a Khandish, very Eastern themed map, sort of quite open. There are a few terrain features though, which should make this a little bit more interesting than if it was just a grassy plain, so I'm pleased to see this map again. And today we will be seeing a bit of a war between all of the main races of Middle-earth. We will be seeing a team of men, a team of dwarves, a team of elves, and a team of orcs, all fighting for supremacy here. So place your bets as to who's going to win here at the start. Do bear in mind that this is 0.96, so we won't be seeing the new balancing, but rather the balancing that everyone is a little bit more familiar with in 0.96, warts and all. So we'll go through the army compositions, and then I will make my prediction before the battle begins, and then we will sort of see how this unfolds. We'll start off with the human kingdoms, and they actually start off with probably the best spawn on this map, purely because they do have more of the terrain to work with, a big hill. But if you do camp in a team-based battle like this, it's very likely, honestly, that the other teams will gang up on you and kill you. So the human team definitely has to be a little bit careful here. We'll start off with Bloodbath McGrath, who is going to be playing as Harad. He's got some Black Serpent bodyguards here. Interestingly enough, the general's not going to be a part of this unit, so they will be able to be used a little bit more freely. Very swift, fast-moving lancers, capable of dishing out a lot of damage, difficult to catch as well. They can do decently in melee, provided they're not up against a really strong melee cav, but really in melee with other cavalry is definitely not the sort of place where you want your lancers. And Harad's cavalry in general, Mumakil aside, are the sort that you need to keep moving and out of harm's way as best you can so that you can keep cycle charging your enemy. Speaking of which, we have the Serpent Guard here, which of course are just the standard variant. They are not multiple HP, but they still work very nicely as far as lancers go. Obviously they're going to be swiftly moving around the field. Just before I forget about them, there is a unit out here on the flank as well, a unit that was sort of not moved in the deployment phase, accidentally I'm sure. Some dismounted Serpent Guard, which honestly they don't get picked an awful lot because Harad's compositions in 0.96 in particular work best when they are a split between their sort of low tier fodder and then their really dangerous high tier units, but hopefully in the future the Serpent Guard will be made to be a little bit more commonplace, because they are actually a fairly decent unit for what they are in this patch as well, as far as infantry units go. A little bit higher in terms of quality than sort of a very basic man-at-arms unit, but not up to the same level as something like the Castamin's Legion, of course. You can upgrade their armor, I believe, as well. Something like the Uruk High Infantry might be a good thing to compare the Serpent Guard to, actually. South-Run Pikemen, which I believe is still AP in this patch, but they also suffer for this. They have terrible stats, even for pikemen, so as soon as their formation is breached, they will be utterly destroyed by pretty much any other unit, except for like the most basic skirmishers. We have some Haradrim Archers, which in this patch, of course, have been made a little bit infamous because they are, you know, very, very efficient for what they offer. You know, a lot of volume that they get downrange, which is of course very important in 0.96. We've got some more dismounted Serpent Guard up here. I'm pleased to see a lot of Serpent Guard actually. It's not a typical Harad army for 0.96. Some more Haradrim Archers, some Southron Archers up here on the hill as well. Obviously less numbers, but individually a little bit higher quality. So going for a bit of a skirmish focused approach to try. It looks like they are going to try and hold the hill, which is risky because it does mean they'll probably get ganged up on. We have some Hashari Stalkers back here as well, so some Rangers, obviously very, very effective with their body piercing if the positioning is right. A Catapult as well, so this could force engagements where enemies won't want them to be. Trollmen of Harad, which are a fairly common pick just because they are so tough, and obviously they deal quite a lot of damage as well. We've got some Muhard Beast Hunters as well, obviously Javelins, which can do decently in melee. Some more Trollmen of Harad, we've got some Haradrim Spearmen here at the back, and that's just about it by the looks of things for the Harad army. So moving over to his ally, we have more evil men actually. Ending Flame 0210, who's going to be playing as Umbar. Umbar, of course, very resilient in 0.96 and 0.97 upcoming. Got a Ballista as well, so this should be pretty good at sniping out other pieces of artillery, which maybe would have gone after the Harad Catapult, so some good synergy there. Another decent skirmish presence here. The Umbar skirmish is obviously very, very tough on the front line. The Balagair Archers with their shield value, the little buckler that they have. Decent armor value as well. Not a lot of damage from the Balagair Archers, but they are sort of a perfect skirmish option really in this sort of situation. Just soaking up that arrow fire. A couple of units of Balagair Footmen here on the flanks as well. Obviously in terms of being in pure melee, not going to be a lot of damage coming off these guys. They are more effective, I would say, in 0.97, just like most other sort of basic spears. But they can certainly be used to hold down the flanks and sort of try and hold back any advance from the orcs, which are on this side. More footmen. Getting into the centre, we've got more archers. We also have the halberd, so going for some AP polearms here, which again could be very useful for holding back the Orcs in particular if they try to advance and rush on Umbar, as well of course as 3 units of Castamir's Legion, which is going to give a big quality spike here. A lot of decent line infantry from the Kingdoms of Men here. The Serpent Guard and Castamir's Legion together in the numbers that they're in should form a pretty solid front line. Whether they deal enough damage remains to be seen. Got some Amperzani Narduzagar, sans the armor upgrades, but skill against the Orcs will still be appreciated. And then the Umbar general over here, Castamir, because I think our Pharazon's going to be the Numenor general. We have the Naru Royal Guard, obviously good Spear Archer hybrids, multiple HP, and then the Naru Sentinels, one of the finer pike units in the game, on a similar sort of level to the 1st Legion pikes, which is pretty esteemed company to be keeping. And then we also have some Numenorian Lancers here at the back, so more Lancers. So I think probably what the humans are going to be trying to do is focus on their cav micro, while their infantry is going to be sort of sitting out on this hill, trying to hold the line. They're going to be trying to sort of take pot shots at the enemy with their cav. Now let's move on to the Orc Alliance, starting off with Arctic Golem, who's going to be playing as Mordor, so obviously he's got some fodder out here in front. You may as well, they are free after all, so you may as well bring them for the first unit. Anyway, it looks like he's got 2 units actually, because there is a lot of fodder here. But even the first fodder that costs money is obviously not going to be a great deal of an investment, so they're just going to be out here as a meat shield. We've got some Orc Archers as well, which Mordor can certainly skirmish, just because of their numbers in 0.96. But I would still certainly give the edge in a skirmish fight to Umbar. You know, I would say that Mordor probably a bit more rush potential here. There's some Black Legion on both flanks actually, so certainly the potential to push through the Umbar and phalanx, and then some Minas Morgul chosen in the centre, which are pretty decent at pushing themselves. Not quite as much as a Great Shield unit, but they're very resilient, very robust spearmen, which obviously can get into shield wall and start pushing. We've got some Temple Guard in there as well, so some AP archers, which could be used to focus down individual targets, as well as some Sauron's Will for some extra damage, some Orc Javelins, which if they can get situated should do a lot of damage. Olag High and Temple Executioners and Nazgul, in addition to some Morannon Archers. So again, fairly quality focused Mordor army this. I would say they probably have one sort of all-out attack in them before they either succeed or fall apart. So risky potentially from Mordor, and if they do charge right up the gut into Umbar, things will be decided relatively quickly. And then his ally is going to be Darth, who is playing as the Misty Mountains, who are very close actually to the Dwarven Alliance here in the north of the map. We've got some heavy goblin archers here at the front, which in terms of a skirmish presence, they're not going to do a lot of damage to a lot of dwarven infantry with that armour and shields, but we'll see how well they can get on. Over here we have some heavy goblin spears, which in this patch of course are very, very good actually. You know, their overall stats, skill, and the fact they're AP means that appearances can be deceptive. They are being brought more into line with the other heavy goblins in the upcoming patch, which should reduce their effectiveness a little bit, but I still feel as though they're going to be a central part of the Misty Mountains army. Just that AP, the extra utility they offer, going to be important, and obviously the AP very necessary against the dwarves, which is probably why he has brought the White Uruk Fearmongers, which I think if Dol Guldur does indeed get added to the 0.97 patch, they will be moved across to Dol Guldur. This is certainly their style after all. But for the time being, the Ghetto Fountain Guard are going to be here laying down a lot of AP damage as well, provided they don't get ripped apart by crossbows and Orc Hunters. A couple of units of Black Uruks, which will lay down a little bit more of a skillful presence on the infantry line for the Misty Mountains compared to a lot of the other goblins on display. There's obviously some crossbows for the Orcs of the Misty Mountains as well, which again should allow them to do decent damage if they are allowed to get into position, which to be fair I think the dwarves will be a little bit more static than the goblins, so they may very well be allowed to do that. There's some Warg Riders and Snow Trolls out on the flank, which offers the goblins of the Misty Mountains a lot of speed. Goblin King Bodyguard, which is of course where Azog is as usual. Some Cave Trolls, which could be able to break through Dwarven lines, but you know, in sustained melee, a lot of the better Dwarven infantry is going to get the better of the Cave Trolls in the long run, and then some more Warg Riders. So the Orcs are actually split up a little bit. They need to be careful. I don't think they can afford to attack 2 alliances at once. If they do, then the Orcs will probably be falling by the wayside here. Now we move on to the Dwarven Alliance, starting off with Khazad-dûm, played by Tangerine. He's got a couple of units here at the Merc Cavalry, which, you know, the melee cav in general can be a useful tool for guarding the flanks, although they will get ripped apart by the wargs and the trolls, so they will be a purely defensive measure for the dwarves of Khazad-dûm, I believe. Some miners here on the flank as well. Some Orc Hunters, which, as we've said before, compared to a lot of the other Khazad-dûm army, they aren't particularly great at taking arrow fire, but they can dish out a fair amount of damage, sort of akin to a basic Elven Archer, and also they have dual axes in melee, which means they're pretty decent in melee as well. We've got some Warriors of Khazad-dûm, just the standard variant without the armor upgrade, but as far, you know, basic Dwarven infantry is obviously going to be able to pull its weight in a fight. and that's obviously going to be the first wave. There's a Dwarven Ballista over here, which is just a regular ballista. But they could be getting into an artillery duel with the human kingdoms, although the elevation will give the humans the advantage there. And then the centre of the Khazad army going to be back here, some 3rd Legion infantry, just the regular variant. And then here is where all the quality is going to be. A couple of units of Sons of the Fallen, some 1st Legion pikes as well, in addition to Balin, who is going to be with the Mithril Guard, which are the AP version of the very elite Khazad infantry. Now his ally, of course, there is only one other Dwarven faction, so it's going to be Erebor. This is the person who sent me the replay, Baconfish302, so big thank you to him. He's got the Dwarven Catapult, which, you know, big area of effect with that cluster shot that they have. But again, it is going to be a little bit susceptible to being sniped out by the human artillery if they aren't careful. Ironfoot Hammer Guard as well as some Merc Cavalry of their own. So the Dwarves actually have got a pretty large cavalry presence, although most of it is melee cav. The Hammer Guard are a little bit of a weird unit, but you know, they also tend to do pretty well in a sustained melee fight in addition to having a lot of mass on the charge. We've got some Ironfoot Halberds as well as some Ironfoot Spears, so a lot of Ironfoot here. A very sort of basic army in terms of the infantry for Erebor. Ironfoot Pikes as well as Ironfoot Crossbowmen. Obviously bringing that catapult and the Ironfoot Hammer Guard is expensive, but even so, this very uniform looking Erebor army should do decently in terms of cost effectiveness, but I feel as though this army is going to be defined by the performance of the catapult and the Ironfoot Hammer Guard. Both of these Dwarven armies in general, I'll be interested to see how they get on. Khazad obviously very strong in 0.96. Meanwhile, over here in the corner we have the first of the Elven players. We have Bakrish Tiny Tark, who's playing as Lothlorien. He's in the corner here on this very small bit of elevation. Kind of lucky, I think, that the Dwarves are not going to turn around and just rush him, because he has got a small army and he could be swamped if he's not careful. But he does have a ballista out in front, so a lot of artillery action going to be happening. We have the Galathrim Nobles as well. I'm a big fan of them just because of how effective they are in melee. We have some Lothlorien spears as well, backed up by some Lothlorien axes, so obviously some very elite elven units on display. Lothlorien archers, some Maether Ilazgelen for the additional AP. Lothlorien blades, which we'll be saying goodbye to these guys in 0.97, as they're kind of combined with sort of a basic elven swordsman for Lothlorien, sort of something akin to the Eldar Makar. I'm not sure if the unit model will still be used for a sort of upgraded variant of it. We'll see. That's what happened to the Eastron Clansmen after all, in their biggest upgrade. Previously the Swift Blades, that was a long time ago now though. We have the Lothlorien Swordmasters here at the back, obviously just protected behind everything else, but very big damage dealers. More Lothlorien archers, and then here at the back we have the Lothlorien Mounted Company, which is actually where Haldir is going to be. So an interesting place to put him in a unit that isn't multiple HP and is best off used aggressively. We'll see if that pays off for the Elves, I should say. And then finally we have Smoking and Tolkien, who's going to be playing as Linden. He's got some 4 Linden Marines, another faction which is very strong actually in the current patch. We have a High Elven Catapult in addition to some more 4 Linden Archers, some Mithlond Marines as well, so obviously Javelin presence for Linden, always very good with their hybrid units. 4 Linden Pikes as well, a common choice because Elven Pikes, even basic ones like this, are very, very handy. Meanwhile we have some Mithlond Lancers over here, so 2 units of Javelin Cavalry, not the best in melee compared to the other choices that Linden have, but they could be used to sort of weaken that Harajim cavalry line. And in addition to that we have the Noldorin Horse Lords, which in terms of a singular cavalry unit is probably the strongest on the field today, because we aren't seeing any of the Melkor's Chosen. We aren't, well, the Hammer Guard are an interesting one, but I would still say the Noldorin Horse Lords overall are going to be the strongest unit. Noldorin Guard on both sides actually, as well as some Mithlond Swordmasters and some Harlan infantry over here. So my prediction for this one, based purely on positioning, is that the human kingdoms probably start off with a bit of an edge. The Dwarven kingdoms, however, at the very least have deployed their armies together, whereas both the Orcs and the Elves have divided themselves up a bit. I don't know whether the Linden player is going to be sort of moving all of his infantry quickly over to try and sort of link up with Lothlorien. It looks like that's what's going to happen. The Orcs, on the other hand, are pointing right at their enemies, so we'll see how well that goes. I'm going to say that I'm going to pitch my tent in the Dwarven camp, just because in 0.96 Khazad are so effective, and even if they haven't, well actually no, they haven't really, well, the army composition isn't typical. Yeah, I'm going to change my mind actually, I'm going to go for the human kingdoms, just because if the other teams do not all decide to band together and try and move them from their perch, the terrain is going to be a significant advantage for them. The artillery is in a good position, they have cavalry that they can use as well. I'm going to say the humans for this one, but obviously that prediction will go right out the window if they get ganged up on, as they should. But without further ado, let's begin. It's a fairly long battle after all, 32,000 frames, which is what kind of convinces me that there isn't going to be an immediate rush by the Orcs, which is probably for the best, both of the Orc factions are going to need to think about what they're doing, although right away over here you can see the Misty Mountains are actually moving forward. The Heavy Goblin Archers sort of getting into position to try and skirmish down, which overall in a skirmish fight they will probably lose to the Orc Hunters of Khazad-dûm, but cost efficiency wise that would be quite up in the air, because the Orc Hunters are significantly more expensive than just these basic Goblin Archers, which we have going on over here. Meanwhile, indeed Lyndon is going to be moving to link up with Lothlorien, which is going to give the Dwarves a bit of a claustrophobic feeling here in the middle, because they don't really have any significant terrain they can take advantage of. I guess they do against the Misty Mountains, but the Elves have got the terrain advantage on them from the other side, and if they get sandwiched between three armies, that isn't going to bode too well for them. Although, immediately here you can see actually that the Orcs of Mordor immediately turning around and trying to get over to the aid of their ally, which they do actually need to do fairly quickly, I think, because the Misty Mountains have moved their army forwards into the firing line of the Dwarves, and the Dwarves, both Dwarven armies, have sort of shifted their perspectives around to get ready to face their hated enemy, the Goblins from the Misty Mountains. And obviously the Heavy Goblin Archer's not going to be doing a huge amount of damage, but they do have some decent tools here. They've got a fair amount of AP, they've got some skill, they've got trolls, crossbows, and wargs, which should make them a pretty dangerous foe on horseback. The Merc Cavalry is not going to enjoy fighting the wargs at all. You can see that the humans not budging, and they will be all too happy to see an engagement between all three of the other armies on display. It will be quite interesting to see how this plays out. But it does look as though the first fight is probably going to be between the Dwarves and the Orcs, which, based on terrain and overall quality, I would give the edge to the Dwarves, especially with Khazad-dûm here with a lot of very nice units like the 3rd Legion and the 1st Legion. The Sons of the Fallen in the middle as well means that trying to push through the ranks with stuff like the Black Legion of Barad-dûr is probably not going to work out all that well. You can see here the Ballista getting into position. So there is going to be a bit of an extended period of manoeuvring around the field here, as everyone tries to get into the right position to engage. The Ballista should be in range, but whether or not it's in range to actually hit anything vital is another matter entirely. Olag high over on the distance as well, and obviously with the sort of varying terrain of this map, it is worth saying that you do need to be a little bit careful, because if you do take an unfavourable engagement with like javelins and artillery and crossbows all around the place, then you can quickly find your army losing, even if you think your quality should be enough to see you through, which is obviously why the Elves are sort of moving to meet up on this high ground over here. It's obviously why the humans deployed on the hump over there. But the Orcs here are probably in the most awkward of positions from the outset. A couple of hits there on Black Orcs in the mountains, but they're superficial at best. Artillery is a bit of a wild card in an open field battle like this, because trying to get the best out of it can be a little difficult. And obviously this does play into the humans' hands as well. The more artillery ammunition that is used elsewhere, the less chance that their artillery is going to be sniped, and the more likely it is they're going to be able to maintain their position up on the hill. It is rather interesting. Mordor, it looks like they're turning around and maybe going to go after the humans once again. The Orcs are in the most awkward position though, because in terms of like the terrain lottery, they've probably drawn the shortest straw. They've got the lowest ground on average. Whereas even the Dwarves here, which started off in a relatively flat section of the map, have got a terrain advantage over the Orcs, which is not something you want to see when, generally speaking, your units are going to be of lower quality individually than particularly Khazad-dûm, but also Erebor have got some very nice sort of uniform units that they can use. Meanwhile, we may very well have the first cavalry engagements here. This is not a fight that the Merc Cavalry wants to take. They get into position to sort of try and squeeze on the Orc position as they try and move away, but the Warg's getting a charge off, and the Merc Cavalry is not going to enjoy being in melee with them. However, the Wargs are also taking a bit of friendly fire from their own archers there on the flank. But yeah, this Merc Cavalry, there's a lot of it from both Erebor and Khazad-dûm. But Wargs here with their multiple HP and their anti-cavalry capability should be more than enough to start chewing through this Merc Cavalry, and so it is turning out to be. The other unit of Wargs also coming back, and that is going to be enough to rout them off very quickly. Mercs, of course, have got lower morale on average than standard units, and they had no support here against Wargs, and they were taking ranged fire, and spears were on the way. So they should come back though. 22 and 32 is not a sort of unit crippling amount of losses, so they should be back, but a bit of a foolhardy engagement there. And considering their relatively weaker position, the Orcs managing to get a decent chunk of that engagement there. The Wargs getting into position to fight once again. The Cave Trolls are in close proximity as well, so even if the Hammer Guard came in, the Trolls would probably be enough to do a decent amount of damage to them. Meanwhile, the Heavy Goblin Archers trying to skirmish with the Dwarves. But you can see here that the Heavy Goblin Archers are taking losses. The Orc Hunters are in position. Also, the Artillery could be getting involved any moment as well, which there are some densely packed clusters of Goblins on the field. You can see that they are dividing their forces here, the Orcs, which is bold, but is not likely to yield much in the way of results. But what it will do is force some of the other factions into action. And this is now, it was benefiting the humans earlier on, at least it looked like it, but now the Elves are probably going to be enjoying what they're seeing now. If Mordor do mount an assault on Umbar, that will weaken them for later. Also, the Orc Fodder are the ones that are absorbing all of this arrow fire from Umbar, so again, wise use of his fodder there from the Mordor player. You can see here the Cave Trolls getting into an engagement with the Hammer Guard. The Hammer Guard are getting out of there, though. The Heavy Goblin Spears are here, and the static nature of the Dwarven infantry here is not actually helping them, because these sort of little peripheral engagements are going pretty solidly in the favour of the Misty Mountains so far, and such a heavy investment here on the mercenary cavalry, not looking like it's worth it at the moment. If they are up against the Lancers from the human kingdoms, or even the Elves, that possibly would have been a little different. But as it is, against the Wargs, that's not an engagement that mercenary cavalry is going to enjoy at all. Downhill charge here, but the Wargs are just going to turn around, and this unit of Merc cavalry, it's only got 22 men left in the unit, probably going to get torn up. It is worth saying that the Wargs will probably be exceedingly damaged by the time all these engagements are over, because this is a lot of Merc cavalry to get through. Also, the arrow support coming from the Orc Hunters here in the main Dwarven army is going to be a significant factor. However, I feel as though all of this cavalry will be more of a loss to the Dwarves than it is the Orcs. The Misty Mountains still have Trolls, after all, that they can use as a real power play, whereas the Dwarves are going to be sort of relegated to trying to hope their artillery does it and their elite infantry slowly grinds the enemy down, which of course they can very easily do. Here comes some Wargs who are getting into the Hammer Guard. But the Heavy Goblin Spears are also here, and while in this patch the Spears are still a little bit underwhelming against cavalry, this is an AP Spear unit, so the very expensive Hammer Guard need to be real careful here, because that is a unit which can turn the tide of a battle quite easily. You can see here there's plenty of dead Dwarves on the floor, so the Goblins are at least causing damage to the Orc Hunters. You can see here that the Merc Cavalry is still shaken. A lot of the Wargs at this point are dead, but a lot of the Merc Cavalry, you know, routing off consistently, not having the sufficient support. As you know, taking on Wargs with Merc Cavalry was always going to be a little bit risky. You can see here a little bit of a probing attack, more than anything for Mordor, which never actually devolved into a melee fight, interestingly enough. It was only really the Orc Fodder potentially trying to waste a bit of ammunition from the human kingdoms on this hill, which they managed to do. And now Mordor are going to go back to the aid of their ally, which possibly a decent move, because I'd say that the Dwarves at this point possibly looking a little ropey. Without their cavalry support, Mordor could flank them, and if the Misty Mountains attack them from the front, that might be the best way to go about this, but there are obviously a lot of Dwarven units here which are very sturdy and robust. So it would be a risk to do that, and even the winner of that particular fight would probably be crippled. Damaged enough for the Elves or the humans to kill them off with even a few units of cavalry, but you know, someone has to roll the dice at some point in a sort of free-for-all environment like this. And for the most part, that so far has been the Orcs, so good on them. The Dwarves have also ridden to meet them. Time will tell whether the humans and the Elves join in. Two remarkable misses there, but then another very nice hit there in a very densely packed group of Heavy Goblin Spears. So already, the Khazad Ballista paying dividends. The Heavy Goblin Archers moving into position. Obviously Mordor have got their own archers as well, which the Orc Archers and Morannon Archers at this point are getting into position. So the Dwarves are probably feeling the heat from all of these archers at this point. Again, the Dwarves can withstand arrow fire a good deal better than quite a lot of other factions on display. But even so, this is a lot of arrows that are going to be flowing into their lines. And even if they miss the Orc Hunters, they're still going to be able to hit some of these basic infantry units. Actually, some of these Warriors of Khazad do have the armour upgrade. You can see here the Dwarves taking some attritional damage. Obviously the Orcs are going to be able to take attritional damage much better than any other faction just because of their superior numbers. The catapult here is going after just the Mordor army, but again, it's mostly hitting fodder and just basic archers, which, if Mordor are going to take casualties, that is definitely the area in which they're going to accept those casualties. Is this going to be the first melee engagement? If it is, that's a bold move, because the artillery is in a perfect position to get direct hits on very close units in melee, and also a lot of these units here are looking fairly damaged, although this is going to be a sort of genuine assault here. The Misty Mountains are going to attack from the front, and I guess the hope is that Mordor try and cycle around them from the side. I don't know, this is going to be pretty much the ultimate litmus test of teamwork here from the Orc perspective. The Dwarves, all they really need to do is hold their shape, and they should be fine, but if the Orcs sort of perform well enough in tandem, they could certainly do some damage. But you can see here, the Merc Cavalry charging into the Heavy Goblin Crossbowmen, able to get a charge off, but they are melee cav, so it wasn't devastating. And more so than that, they're probably going to rout here. They are the Trolls in close proximity. The other Merc Cavalry being broken off by the basic melee cav. Well, I think it's about time we went down to half speed once again as all of this is happening. You can see there the Heavy Goblin Spears being laid to waste by, that looks like the Blacklock Engineers. Indeed it is, so Baconfish did have an elite unit on foot, and the Blacklock Engineers ripping through those Heavy Goblin Spears. And again, I don't think the time was quite right for the Orcs to mount this assault, and especially going uphill into the Dwarves with their artillery in such a dangerous position. And units like Orc Fodder trying to go after Mithril Guard, I mean, points for ambition, if nothing else, but the Mithril Guard are not even going to break a sweat in this fight, unfortunately, for the Orcs. The Orc Archers and Moran on Archers are still firing, however. Probably going after the polearm units, stuff like the Ironfoot Pikes and Halberds. Much more lively target for the Archers to go after. Obviously, most of the shielded heavy Dwarven infantry is not going to be too concerned under basic archer fire like this. They will take losses, of course, but not to the extent that the Orcs will probably need as this fight starts wearing on. Because this is only the first wave of the Orc Assault, and I would have thought that if they were going to really try and make this assault stick, they would need to try and smash the Orcs apart in one fell swoop. And it doesn't look like that is going to be the case. And if this turns into a sort of grindy attritional fight, wave to wave, there's only going to be one victor in that instance, and it's going to be the Dwarves. We'll see, though. A lot of archers here from Mordor, which are sort of firing along the side of the Dwarven position, going after potentially the artillery crews. Dwarven miners pursuing the routing fodder. All these units are wavering, trying to block the charges of the Ironfoot Hammer Guard, but I mean, needless to say, the Orc fodder are not going to keep their morale together long under charges from a cavalry unit like that. Well, you can see that the Elves are getting into position to potentially try and go after the human kingdoms, but the manoeuvring over there is happening relatively slowly. All of the action happening on this front. Well, still a unit of Merc Cavalry which has returned again. It looks as though this is the last one that is in sort of working order, though, and they're charging right near Cave Trolls, which, I mean, they're going to charge into the Cave Trolls, and again, Lancers actually can kill Trolls off the charge. But melee cavalry like that, especially ones that have already broken before and have shown themselves to be a little bit break happy, not exactly the purpose that they were intended for. Cave Trolls absolutely massacring them, causing them to break. Here come the Black Legion of Barad-dûr. I mean, this engagement has certainly gone against the Orcs, and the Dwarves can certainly afford to be pretty pleased with their day's work, but they will still be taking casualties here. Stuff like the Heavy Goblin Crossbows are going to be doing damage, and there's still stuff like the Nazgul as well, somewhere. But again, I think that one of the real deciding factors here is the fact the artillery is in such a perfect position to get, like, point-blank shots into the Orc lines. Orcs have got enough issues with holding their morale together under sustained pressure from Dwarven infantry, let alone artillery as well. Here come the Cave Trolls, which could smash their way through the lines. And the Cave Trolls could start going after the artillery, but even, you know, you can see here, the Black Legion as well are much better, like the Cave Trolls, at just trying to sort of quickly work their way through lines, instead of getting embroiled in a sort of long, drawn-out fight like this, because it's not really what they're intended for. I know a lot of people are not big on the pushing units, but this is going to be their weakness ultimately. In a sustained fight with a lot of Dwarven infantry, they aren't going to be quite up to the standards of a lot of other units. There are a lot of them, but you can see here they're already shaken. The warriors of Khazad moving downhill. Orc hunters getting into the flank. They have a massive shield value, of course. Ooh, there's some Orc javelins in the background there, trying to do a little bit more damage to the dwarves, but ultimately this engagement is not going as well as they would have hoped. I mean, to be fair, a lot of the dwarven units have had to be committed forwards. I mean, not a lot of their elites, but even so, the orcs can still do damage to the dwarves for later. Heavy goblin archers in melee, who are being hunted by the Mithril Guard. Absolute savagery. Meanwhile, over here, the Ironfoot Hammer Guard are taking losses. They're supported by the miners. They're going after the Mordor skirmish line, which is still proving to be a bit of an annoyance for the dwarves. A lot of their units sort of taking casualties, piece by piece. The heavy goblin crossbows, however, are a much more juicy target. And a nice charge there. They need to be careful, though. Minas Morgul chosen in close proximity. Well, just go down to half speed once more. Let's see what's happening over here. So we can see some 4 Linden archers, which looked like they were going to be getting into position to try and skirmish with Umbar and Harad. Umbar and Harad, to their credit now, are actually advancing down off the hill with some of their units. But potentially that is going to just draw the elves in and then allow the human artillery to start going to work. Although they're using flaming shot, I believe the elven artillery is going to try and snipe out the Haradrim catapult, and in this artillery duel, if one of them is using flaming shot, the victor will always be the one using regular ammunition, because flaming shot is substantially more inaccurate but much more damaging to infantry blobs. But yeah, the elves could actually win the artillery fight here, which would swing this fight significantly, because it would force the humans off the hill and they would have to go into the elves, which would mean going into all sorts of really, really damaging Lothlorien infantry as well as the Linden javelins. So this could prove to be a pretty significant development in this fight over here, as we have 2 2v2s which have erupted on both sides, and I would give the advantage here to the elves and the dwarves. Thus far, my initial prediction about the humans doing well may not come to much in the end. The Minas Morgul chosen moving forward, so things are starting to be a little bit more serious on the front line from the orcs now, particularly over here where stuff like the White Uruk Fearmongers are coming into play. Their AP will be useful, but you can see there the blood sprays coming up from the Blacklock Engineers, which also have situated themselves at the top of this hill over here with the artillery. Obviously the Blacklock Engineers are devastating enough when you don't have them in a position as deadly as this, but here, no, the Orc infantry is at the mercy of probably pound for pound the most deadly skirmish unit in the game at the moment. If the Blacklock Engineers perform at their peak, the damage they can do is absolutely incredible. Although obviously they do not have the... they have all of the weaknesses of crossbows as well, so the firing arc can make a significant difference. And they are very expensive, of course. Here we can see the heavy goblin crossbows trying to get into position to do more damage. It looks like they're going after the Ironfoot Hammer Guard. There's Morannon archers over here, which are actually getting torn up by dwarven miners. There's a few Minas Morgul chosen over here, but it looks as though this is a unit which is strung out. There's only a few of them over here, whereas it looks like most of them are in melee over here, having to deal with stuff like Mithril Guard. The dwarves will be weakened by this endeavour, though. The Orc Assault may not have been advisable at the time it was, but stuff like the Temple Guard and the crossbows, they're always going to do damage. There's also the Shadow Guard over here, which is going to introduce some body piercing to the dwarves. The Olag Kai as well, going to do some decent damage. I would still certainly back the dwarves though. The artillery is still in position, and overall, just the orcs, I have the feeling they're just going to have much more trouble keeping themselves together. 3rd Legion coming around the flank. Temple Executioners though, that is a fight the 3rd Legion won't actually win. Meanwhile, you can see here the elves actually pulling back. What is going on with the artillery duel? Thus far, actually no hits, which surprises me. Well, there is a hit. The first of the Haradrim catapults has been dismantled, but the Umbar Ballista is now here, and honestly I feel as though the humans really do need to force the elves to come to them. If it's the other way around, the elves are going to absolutely love that engagement. The Lothlorien infantry is so damaging, it's going to rip and tear its way through the vast majority of Haradrim and Umbar troops. And obviously backing that up with Linden's javelins as well that's a match made in heaven. You can see here that a single unit of dismounted Serpent Guard kamikazed across the field, and with arrows flying all over the place, both friendly fire and fire from the Elven archers. No, unsurprisingly caused them to break almost immediately. You can see here a nice layered defense going on from the humans, which I've sort of bemoaned layered defenses before in siege battles in particular, but here it's layered skirmishes for the most part. So you've got the artillery, you've got sort of some basic units on the front, you've just got the infantry sort of holding the base of the hill, trying to force them into the artillery, which is a good way of doing things. It's not simply sending in units wave by wave into a choke point like people often make the mistake of doing in siege battles. Meanwhile, over here we can see the Temple Executioners, which are obviously a very, very strong unit indeed, fighting the 3rd Legion. Looks like they're going to be surrounded though, which Temple Executioners probably won't like being surrounded by 3rd Legion, but even so, that isn't an engagement which is going to be particularly enjoyable for either side. Over here, meanwhile, what's left of the Hammer Guard, which has certainly paid its dues in this fight, trying to stop the Mordor Rangers from firing, the Númenórean Shadow Guard doing well for themselves. The Temple Guard with their armor-piercing arrows as well, trying to go after the 3rd Legion. Here's some Orc Javelins, and you can see here now that the front line for the Orcs is starting to look a little bit more dismal. With the backup of the 1st Legion Pikes, all of this Dwarven infantry should be just fine. Obviously there's a lot of Ironfoot units, a lot of basic Khazad-dûm units. There wasn't really too many really elite Dwarven units on display, other than the Khazad-dûm Sons of the Fallen and 1st Legion Pikes. But overall, the quality discrepancy here. A lot of these sort of basic Orc units got absolutely dumpstered immediately. You can see here the Mithril Guards still doing very well for themselves. There are some Blackback Berserkers on the front line as well though, so the Orcs did have a lot of elite units, but overall their army just couldn't hold itself together under the fire from the artillery. And of course the Blacklock Engineers and all the archers up on the hill. I mean, the terrain really worked for the dwarves in spades. Heavy Goblin crossbows might still have some ammunition actually, although you can see here that the Dwarven Miners have just about finished mopping up the Mordor archers. Good for them. Good to see a militia unit paying its dues. These Orc archers managed to retreat. Actually no, the Mordor archers did just retreat over to here. But now you can see the Dwarven Miners are going to have basically a straight charge into the Heavy Goblin crossbows, which is a much better target to go after than the basic Orc archers. As the armies continue to start to break, the Olakai trying to help out the Temple Executioners. Temple Guards still trying to do their best as well, but the spine of the Orc armies here starting to collapse. Heading back over to here. Meanwhile, let's go back up to 1 speed actually. Looks like, yeah, still 2. I heard an artillery piece break, and that was one of the High Elven catapults. What is going on here? Oof. Something's fighting something. There was a unit of trollmen that were committed over here. Are you serious? Well, I mean, the unit of trollmen, which, honestly, that's a bit of a waste. I mean, if you were going to throw a unit under the bus, at least use a unit of Haradrim spearmen or something. Throwing your trollmen in here is basically feeding kills into the elves. I mean, to be fair, they have managed to sort of shove the elven artillery back a little bit, but that's certainly not a reason to lose your trollmen, of all things. One of Harad's most potent forces. You can see here the Haradrim archers trying to do their best to skirmish down, which honestly, you know, even basic archers like this, they're pretty efficient in .96 in general, against Linden doubly so if they're not sort of receiving any counter fire. But I'm actually surprised that the elves have not managed to take advantage of some of this, to be honest with you. Because if the humans did not have their artillery, you would have backed the elves here, but the longer this goes on, the more the humans are going to be able to... Oh, there goes the Ballista, which it looks like is going for the Serpent Guard and the Casimir's Legion. Again, I'm really surprised they're not going for the artillery here, because at this point the human artillery is... it should have been dead already. The elves should probably have killed it off already, and now Lothlorien's strong unit starting to take some damage. Over here we can see some Belagaya footmen again. It's possible that what they're trying to do is sort of blob the enemy up for their skirmishers to do more damage. And again, the humans can certainly afford to take more of this attrition than the elves can, but it's risky, this is. If you feed too many kills into the elves, you'll find yourself with not enough manpower to withstand the quality as time goes on. Mithlon Lancers, that is a foolhardy endeavour, that. They're now going to be bogged down by spearmen and 2 units of Lancers. And they are Lancers themselves. Individually, I'd back the Mithlon Lancers to beat any unit here except the Black Serpent Bodyguards. But you can see here that they are... They didn't take too many units. Too many losses, sorry. But yeah, the humans, very strange sort of engagement this over here. I feel as though one team should have taken advantage of the other's mistakes at this point, but so far both of them are still in it. Meanwhile, over here, despite a very sterling effort by the orcs to try and sort of conquer the dwarves when they're in a very nice position, ultimately the strength and heavy-duty nature of the dwarves are able to see them over the line here. The Blackback Mountain Berserkers and the Goblin King's Bodyguard being mulched by the Mithril Guard. There are First Legion in there as well. Sons of the Fallen still in pretty decent shape. There goes Azog. All of those halberds. There go the Morannon Archers. The Temple Guard won't rout, of course. Pretty decent in melee themselves, but at this point in time, obviously, it's a matter of numbers. So the Orcs will be the first to fall, which I'm sure a lot of people will be highly satisfied with. And honestly, the Dwarves still have a pretty decent force left. They did take damage, but they've also still got plentiful infantry, which, based on the sort of finely balanced nature on the other side of things, they could have the strength needed to sort of kill everyone off in the late game. And there go the Orcs. Well, there goes the Misty Mountains anyway. The Misty Mountains, the first individual army to fall, and the Orcs will also be the first faction to fall. There goes the Mordor General. Of course, the Mordor elites will just sort of stand and fight for as long as they're still alive. Temple Guard. We'll see if the Orcs manage to do enough damage to the Dwarves to make life more difficult for them in the late game, but there's still some Ironfoot crossbows. The Dwarves still have a well-rounded enough army to be a real challenge for whoever meets them in the late game. They might just move right across the field and try and take the hill. It would be very tempting, actually, for the Dwarves to try and sort of usurp the humans up on the hill by attacking them when they don't have the resources to stand against this force, and then using the hill advantage against the Elves, which, after the Elves have already been through the ringer against Harad and Umbar, might be the way that the Dwarves can secure victory here. Alternatively, they could sort of bide their time and just sort of sit back and hope that they have sufficient resources to kill off whoever is victorious in this fight. But that is risky, because not only are you sort of banking on this being an even fight, which it could always turn into a landslide even bigger than the one that happened over there, but also you're effectively surrendering the hill, which, particularly against the Elves, I have to say, charging uphill into Elven infantry and Linden javelins would not be great. There's some regular Hashari as well, which were hidden. Still a lot of artillery blows being traded. Some Fallen Archers are very, very depleted. Mithlon Lancers out on the flank. Very interesting how the humans in particular have sort of sent out individual units into the middle of no man's land. I'm actually kind of surprised that the Nolder and Horswords have not simply turned around to charge them. I mean, there's there's Hashari Stalks, I suppose. It is a daunting task for the Elves, though, like, particularly putting myself into the mind of one of the Elven players here. It is daunting to try and go up that steep hill with an army which is smaller, but you also have to understand that your army is sort of much higher in terms of quality. Really, the Castamir's Legion are the thing which is going to be holding Umbar's line together. A lot of the Balagai units in particular are not going to be able to withstand Elven units. And the same is true for Harad. I mean, the Dismounted Serpent Guard are okay. The Hashari have got decent skill. What the hell that was. Still another unit of Trollmen as well. But this is going to be where the focus of the battle will be from now on, pretty much, because it does look as though the Dwarves are going to be making their way over here, which is probably going to concern the humans more than anything. You can see here that the ballista trying to snipe out the catapult, but it's hitting the crew and not the final remaining artillery piece. Castamir's Legion on the front line. That's going after the catapult, getting another nice hit. So I feel as though this is just going to cancel one another out. The artillery is not really going to have a significant victory for either side, which is ultimately, I don't know who that's going to work in favour of. Certainly you'd expect the Elves, if things sort of devolved into just a brawl, the Elves to win, provided they kept their organisation. But if it turned into a mess, I'm not so sure. Looks as though Harad are going to try and sort of flank around here.
After them, cut the cowards down.
I guess that's the final straw for the Orcs of Mordor. So the Orcs will be finishing with the wooden spoon in 4th place. Let's see who takes the bronze, silver and gold medals. The Elven Cavalry just sort of biding its time out here on the flank, and Aldering Guard. They still have their catapult, which presumably still has ammo, and they're trying to sort of spare it the wrath of the Umbar Ballista. Speaking of which, still a couple of Ballista alive over here from Lothlorien. And Lothlorien still has most of their elite infantry alive at the back as well, as a unit of particularly damaging lancers in the mounted company. Again, this is a duel between two of the archer units which were left out in front, and obviously, you know, the Elven Archer is going to be more than sufficient to win that. Although they are also drawing the fire of the Castamir's Rangers, so the Elves will take that. If there are two units of Rangers up there, the Hashari Stalkers and the Castamir's Rangers, then the Elves will certainly want them gone before they mount any sort of assault, because we saw how dangerous body piercing can be on the other side of the map. Albeit the the Black Block Engineers are a somewhat special case there, being crossbows, but even so, the same principle would apply here. Black Serpent Bodyguard's going to be able to rout off those Elves. So again, a very nervy encounter this. The humans very eager to hold on to their hill, which is understandable to be fair, because they set themselves up army-wise to be defensive, artillery, both of them investing in their rangers, both of them investing in a lot of line infantry for holding the line. And if they did charge down and try and be aggressive against the Elves, they would be entirely reliant on their numbers to see them over the line there, which is risky. Especially with the Linden Javelins in close proximity, the damage that they can do. If you move into gung-ho a fashion, it can go very poorly for you. Still some Numenorian Lancers out here on the flank. Naru and Aru Royal Guard on top of the hill. To be fair, most of the human units at this point are not actually on the hill. They're sort of around its base, as the dwarves sort of slowly but surely make their way across the field. Not a lot of cavalry from the humans left other than that Numenorian Lance unit either. The Harad cavalry is pretty much spent at this point in time, and the Elven cavalry is still mostly alive and well. Which is another reason probably why the humans are not going to be too eager to move in, even if Harad is going to try and sort of cycle around here, but I doubt that's going to stick. Here come the Mithlon Lancers, which I'd be extremely surprised if they did not draw the ire of the skirmishers, which still have ammunition on top of the hill. Because they are Lancers, they can still get decent damage off the charge, and Alderaan Horselaw is charging right into the Belagair Archers as well, so the Knights, I mean those Archers are certainly out of ammunition at this point, so more of an expendable unit than anything else. Halberds are coming in, but that cavalry is still just going to be able to cycle out of there without too many issues. Bit of a rickety front line that has been constructed here. In places it's Castamir's Legion, and in other places it's archers that are out of ammunition. Harad are going to try and flank around, but the Elven Cavalry is going to come in here. And they're going after the Hashari, which is... The Hashari, I'm not sure actually, because they've got a lot of defensive skills, so they might actually be able to sort of mitigate the damage from cavalry a little bit better than sort of basic units, but... I mean, the Linden Cavalry does need to be careful, because the Trollmen are here. There's a lot of Harad units, and if they get bogged down, it's not going to go too well for them. But you would still back the Linden Cavalry to get a lot of damage done to this Harad advance. And if Harad are going to advance, then Umbar will need to as well, otherwise this assault is doomed to failure. They will certainly need the support of units like the Castamir's Legion, back up from the Castamir's Rangers, and potentially even the Naru Na'aru Sentinels, but I don't think they're going to. I think Umbar are going to resolutely hold their position around the hill's base, which doesn't bode well for Harad, honestly. Harad have got some decent units left, but if they advance into this Lothlorien infantry block, they're in for a bad time. Lothlorien have got Lothlorien axes, blades, spears, the works. The only thing they're really missing is the AP axe unit, but they don't really need it against Harad. A dismounted Serpent Guard going toe-to-toe with the Lothlorien axes in terms of quality. There's only going to be one winner there. Black Serpent Bodyguard making a nuisance of themselves, trying to charge into the side, but at this point the Linden Cavalry coming to the aid of their allies. Umbar starting to move now. Where are they going to go? I mean, to their credit, the humans have come off the hill and attacked, but I'm not sure it's going to go too well here for Bloodbath McGrath. It looks as though my prediction is going to go right out the window, and this may very well turn into a duel between the dwarves and the elves, which both factions are... I don't know, I mean the Dwarves have got a decent amount of their forces left, but the Elves could as well, if this carries on the way it is, because I'm not really sure Harad are going to be able to effectively hold back the tide here. Again, they've sent forward an individual unit and are trying to sort of send a bunch of skirmish fire in here. But if Lothlorien... Oh, we've had Beast Hunters as well. Well, here comes a break from the dismounted Serpent Guard, getting recharged by the Mounted Company. Maybe try and assassinate Haldir, but Elven morale is not going to suffer too much from the loss of a general. Here come Umbar, advancing slowly but surely into Linden, who, needless to say, have got their javelins, but Linden might be tempted to try and save their javelins for the Dwarves. And you can see the Dwarves actually sort of moving to a higher ground that they could then try and attack the Elves from. Again, I'm quite surprised actually that Umbar are attacking these Linden pikes from the front. This is exactly the engagement that Linden would want. Here come some javelins as well. Bit of friendly fire there, actually. I mean, the Castamir's Legion are good. Looks like a little bit more focus has been put on this side. More units trying to flank around, but there's still Moldering Guard over here. Which, again, Castamir's Legion, I can't praise them enough for how much quality they can give on average to an Umbar front line. But 1-to-1, they will not beat Moldering Guard. Moldering Guard are the real deal when it comes to heavy infantry. Heavy line infantry. Victory seems certain. Only a fool could lose this battle. Castamir's Legion continuing to take damage. Being mobbed by Moldering Guard, and the Linden front line should hold just fine. More reinforcements coming down the hill from Umbar, but is it too late? The Númenórean Lance could yet be a factor as well. But Harad, I can't help but feel as though they're really going to struggle. Though I'm actually surprised here, because if Lothlorien really want to sort of make the most of this assault, they need to sort of send forward all of their army, but they're making the same mistake that the Human Kingdoms made earlier on. They're sending forward individual units which are just being overwhelmed by the greater Haradrim numbers. And again, Hashari and Trollmen, that's a potent combination of skill and damage. There's Noldor and Horse Lords in the backline, however, which you would think that means that the Harad skirmishes are not going to last too much longer. Meanwhile, looks as though we do have the Ironfoot Hammer Guard on the periphery over here. What's left of the Dwarven Cavalry, which admittedly is not much after their engagements with the Wargs. That is a Routing Lancer, which actually does interrupt the flow of this charge. But this is a prime target for charging. The Noldorin Guard, after all, very, very strong infantry. So if they can do as much damage as they can now, should give them a bit of a leg up as the battle continues. Here comes the Númenórean Lancers to try and get in behind the enemy lines as well, which Linden have committed forward nearly everything. So they might be powerless actually to stop this cycle charging. Initially it looked like the Elves were going to have quite a comfortable time repelling this human attack, but as time has gone on, their sort of desire to be a little bit more conservative again. You know, I keep saying, when you hold back too many of your units, when you see the opportunity to go in for the kill, you've got to take it. Otherwise this sort of thing can happen, where honestly Lothlorien should have polished off Harad by now. But Harad have accepted the break they've been given, and they're still alive, fighting hard, whittling down the Elven resistance. And of course, the faction that this works most in favour of is the Dwarves, because both of these two factions are going to be taking damage the longer this fight goes on, and that is going to allow the Dwarven infantry to presumably come in and clean up. These Númenórean Lancers need to get some charges off on this blob quickly. What are they going after? This unit of Lancers could be one of the more significant units on the field. They're going to go charge into the rear of this line here. They are. Get the Lancers out. Here they go. A nice charge here, which is going to split the Linden line in half, and actually now Umbar should be able to wrap up the Linden line. Meanwhile, that is the Dwarven artillery, I believe. Indeed it is, the ballista, which at this point it cannot miss. It will go through the Umbar forces and into the Linden forces, which is perfect for the Dwarfs. The only problem is, now you can see that the Umbar forces are routing, which means the Linden forces will be able to move away from this blob. So it was a bloody harvest while it lasted. more routing as well from Umbar. So the dwarves actually doing the elves a solid there by helping out. The ballista crew getting charged. The Mythlon Marines, which maybe still have ammunition, the Lothlorien spears. Now you can see Lothlorien is starting to come forward in force, but is it too late? I don't know. It's gonna be tight. I think Lothlorien should probably still be all right. They may have left it a little bit late for my tastes, but I think they're still going to be okay with the overall level of quality they have, particularly with a unit like this. Like at this point, Harad have got no answer for the Galathran nobles. There's still some Nara and Ira Royal Guard and some Castamir's Rangers up on the hill, which are lending some support, going after the Mythlon Lancers. Hashari doing their best to sort of hold the Galathran nobles in place, but a very, very solid unit at range and in melee. There's also some Mythlon Swordmasters over here giving a hand. So yeah, it looks as though the Elves will probably be victorious, but I don't know whether they're going to have enough men left to sort of face the Dwarves. The humans could still pull out a victory if they sort of sequester these units way up on the hill and hope that the Elves and Dwarves slaughter one another, as well as what they have left as well, doing as much damage as it possibly can. Balagair archers sort of trying to put more pressure on these Elven units. Still Castamir's Legion on the front line, and again they still have this unit of very high damage Lancers. The Numenorean Lancers could yet prove to be a big factor in this battle. You can see here the Abrazani Narduzagar, which there's a lot of dead Forlinden Marines over here. But ultimately it looks as though the Narduzagar have taken some fairly substantial losses beforehand. It looks as though the Mythlon Marines have also been shooting them with javelins, which is why they fared so poorly. Elven skill obviously will help out as well. Hello.
The enemy are badly bloodied. They have lost half their men.
The Umbar Ballista. Looks like it killed off the Dwarven Catapult, which means the... Actually, no, it didn't. That was the Elven Catapult. The Dwarven Catapult is still alive and well. Trying to get what kills it can get with its cluster shot. Pretty inaccurate, but there are enough shots that something is likely to hit. And the presence of the Blacklock Engineers, as we saw their ammunition start being used, causes the Elves to try and retreat, using their ballista crew as a bit of a shield. But the Numenorean Lancers are right here, and they're going to get a nice frontal charge. The Noldering Guard are certainly not looking as healthy as they once did, which, again, works in the favour of the Dwarves. And Linden, it looks as though, are going to lose, actually, over here, so Umbar will still have forces left. His ally Harad, however, not looking quite so healthy. Lothlorien Mounted Company is still alive. You can see here, Harad have basically been relegated to this square, well, I guess it's more of a rhombus or a kite formation. Yeah, they're not going to last too much longer. Still some Muhad Beast Hunters over here. Lothlorien could have won that a little bit more convincingly, but they still have a decent amount of strong units left alive, including their Galathran nobles and their mounted company, which that level of quality and that level of movement could be exactly what the Elves need to sort of take the Dwarves on. We shall see. As Harad continue to try and sort of get what kills they can. Now this could be an interesting move here, as the Castamir's Rangers just laying into the mounted company as they try and charge up the hill. Obviously the hill makes the charge a little slower. Their shields are really saving them here, because usually if that was sort of a unit of just basic cavalry, they would have been shredded en masse by the Castamir's Rangers. The Castamir's Legion are going to try and stop the charge, which I think they're going to be able to. Looks as though they are, yes. And the Elven Cavalry tries to duke, but ultimately fails in its endeavour. And here come the Numenorean Lancers as well. Ultimately a failed endeavour that by the Lothlorien Cavalry. I can see why they did it. There's some Lothlorien archers out on the flank over there as well. But ultimately, not what was required in that situation, I don't think. There goes the Harad General, obviously. Not surprising that Lothlorien having a good time of it. Meanwhile, what have we here? A ballista crew, which going to stop these units. That would be an interesting engagement. Ballista crew, of course, garbage in melee, but there are not many of those Orc Hunters left. But the main body of the Dwarven army is still moving forward, and they still have a good mix of pretty much everything. Basic infantry, throwaway militia. Crossbows and Blacklock Engineers are also a very significant unit to have here in the late game as well, because it means that even if those Umbar units remain on top of the hill, They're probably going to have to sort of take cover behind the hill more than anything else to make that worthwhile. Littlon sword masses over here. Looks like the Narduzagar were defeated in the end by the Littlon Marines, but Littlon Marines actually able to... what are they aiming at? I'd go after the First Legion if I were them. Oh, there's Blacklock Engineers, which I think are targeting them. They are, so they're not long for this world. Oof. They're such a grisly unit, the Blacklock Engineers. And the Dwarven team has done well, actually, because usually the Blacklock Engineers are one of the first things that the enemy will target. They've done a good job of sort of putting them into positions where the enemy can't really get to them too easily. What's left of Linden are sort of kamikaze charging into the main bulk of the Dwarves, and I think the Dwarves are probably going to be alright at this point. They still have 2 units of First Legion, they still have their Sons of the Fallen, they still have their Mithril Guard, and then they still have the backup of all the Erebor crossbows as well as sort of a few more basic units as well. And really what it's going to come down to here is Lothlorien and Umbar are going to need to work together, otherwise this battle is already a foregone conclusion. We are well and truly within the final 10,000 frames. So is the Dwarven Death Blob going to just roll over everything it takes? Or everything it sort of encounters? It's going to be the end of Linden. Really, can the elves and men put their grudges aside for just a moment and join together to face the dwarves? Can bridges be built? There goes the Linden General. Again, a ton of dwarven weaponry. It doesn't look like it will be, because the humans and elves are still fighting one another. A battle between the Númenórean Lancers and the Lothlorien Mounts Company, which looks as though the Lothlorien unit is going to win. Yeah, and you can see here that this is where the battle will ultimately be lost by these two factions, and won by the dwarves. The dwarven players at this point must have been giddy with the fact that the humans and the elves were still trying to tear chunks out of one another. Castamir's ranged. I mean, Umbar still have some pretty elite units up here as well, so with the backup of those Linden infantry units, they could make a decent stand against the dwarves. Even then, I feel as though the dwarves would probably still have the advantage, though, with the crossbows, the blacklocks. The overall quality of their infantry, I think, would probably be too much, even if the humans and the elves join together. But as is, it looks as though the dwarves are going to have an even easier time of it. Again, the elves are sort of sending up units in a bit of a staggered formation. The Castamir's Rangers now are going to have to try and hold back Galathram Nobles, which, in all fairness, well, I'm actually surprised. The Galathram Nobles would have ripped and torn their way through Castamir's Rangers in melee. What are Lothlorien doing? You can see here the dwarves are sort of readying themselves for an assault up the hill, which they should do. They have the strength to just sort of wipe away all of these units. Is this going to be the formation of the Alliance? It's possible, because it looks as though Lothlorien are getting ready to face off against the dwarves. Well, well, well. There's still that Lothlorien Mounts Company. The Númenórean Lancers are long gone. Still a few axes moving into position. So here we go then. Most interesting. It's going to be a lot closer than it otherwise would have been, but I still feel as though the dwarves, they still got units of such quality left. And in particular, those crossbows are going to be the kicker. Like, if they still have decent ammunition in the crossbows and the Blacklock Engineers, that's going to force Umbar and Lothlorien to attack into them. And then you would imagine the dwarves, it's just going to be a matter of positioning their units correctly to slowly but surely wear them down. A lot of these dwarven units are still basic, stuff like Ironfoot pikes and spears, not going to be the ideal thing for going up against Lothlorien blades and Galathram nobles. So perhaps this is still a little bit more finely balanced than I give it credit for, but I would still back the dwarves here. We still have 2 of those hammer guard running around the field as well. That's a big blob of halberds. Still the Blacklock Engineers, the ballista. If that still has ammunition, that'll be a real interesting one as well. So it looks as though Lothlorien are going to try and take the dwarves from the front. Umbar maybe go around and flank them, which is interesting. I probably would have done it the other way round, considering that Umbar have got the really strong pike unit, which could potentially go toe-to-toe with the First Legion. And the Elves, of course, got a little bit more skill, a little bit more damage to try and roll up the line more quickly, but really, they need to be careful they don't accidentally engage one another here. The allies by circumstance are going to fight one another if they touch. It's very weird to note that these two armies are technically hostile to one another, and yet they're fighting side by side all of a sudden. Which is what, that's the sort of thing which makes a free-for-all interesting. The sort of changing.
The battle seems to be swinging in our favour. From such tidings does victory emerge.
Thank you very much. Oh yeah, they still have Blacklock Engineer ammo. Not good for the newfound alliance, but it is one of the things which makes free-for-alls interesting. The changing circumstances which can sort of affect the battles. Numbers are going to be a real problem here as well. The fact that the dwarves can simply circumvent the line with a few units, get into the back lines. Galatharim nobles coming over here. Looks as though Umbar are the ones taking the brunt of that Blacklock fire. Was that it? Was that the end of their ammunition? No, they still have their arbalests out. Still got some crossbows as well. The only hope really for the non-Dwarven alliance here is if the Elven skill can see them through, which it doesn't look like it will. Maybe if this was like a discrepancy between Elves and Orcs in terms of numbers, but the Dwarves, while they don't have the same level of skill as the Elves, they are still a very sturdy opponent. And Galatharim nobles over here, meanwhile, going up against Sons of the Fallen, there's still Mithril Guard, yeah. It was a doomed endeavour from the start, I think. Blacklock Engineers trying to get into a position where they can do some damage once more by the looks of things. I'm sure that they will have an ungodly amount of kills should we actually get to see the stats screens. Last two battles I've shown, actually, it just ended with a replay finish. Florian Axe is getting in here, just committing everything forward, trying to make it as some warriors of Khazad-dûm, trying to make it as competitive as possible. Castamir's Legion. I mean, over here, the Elves could pull out a victory, but here in the middle and here on this side, where the numbers are very much against them, and the quality, actually, even. The Mithril Guard coming in with the backup of the Sons of the Fallen and the First Legion. Two Sons of the Fallen is an interesting build that was selected by Tangerine. But yes, the Dwarves, it's looking more and more like they will have their victory here. That was a pretty lethal shot. That has the look of body piercing because it is not sort of burnt and crispy, which would denote a ballista. Lothlorien blades are wavering. You know the fight is going against you when the Elven front line starts to waver and break. As the Khazad-dûm and Erebor Juggernaut steams ever forward. Lothlorien Swordmaster, another very good unit, but again, they're up against very good Dwarven units. Defeat seems certain for the Galatharim nobles. Again, that's another telltale sign that things are going wrong. And it looks as though the Elven army is going to be the first one to fall, which means the Elves would take the bronze and the humans would take the silver. But the gold in this situation at this point, there can be no doubt that it belongs to the Dwarves. I should have stayed with my initial prediction of Dwarven supremacy in this fight, but I still feel as though the humans could very well have won it if they made better use of their artillery up on the hill. I feel as though the engagement between the humans and the Elves over here was a very weird one, which neither side really came away from looking all that great. And I feel as though either one of them could have taken that engagement by the scruff of the neck and maybe won it more convincingly, and maybe put up a greater challenge for the Dwarves here in the late game. But as it was, the Dwarves dealt with the Orcs very well. Obviously, the Orcs were very reckless in the engagement they took, but I mean, you can't really blame them too much. The terrain was always going to be against them, but they did a decent amount of damage for the Dwarves, considering they put themselves right in the firing line of Blacklock Engineers and 2 pieces of artillery. As the Halberds slowly but surely edge their way forward into the Umbar front line. Yeah, interesting fight. Obviously, it showcased all of the ups and downs, twists and turns of a free-for-all fight. And obviously it had the additional flavour of being technically a race war. One that the Dwarves in this situation have won, but obviously, you know, Khazad-dûm. I was thinking it wasn't exactly a typical Khazad-dûm composition like I've seen previously. Obviously a ballista. Usually Khazad-dûm bring at least 2. There goes Lothlorien. But usually you see a lot of the 4th Legion, which is obviously a very strong unit for Khazad-dûm. They didn't bring them this time, which is why I hesitated to name them my favourites to win. But in the end, Khazad-dûm proving their might even without that. Obviously they brought 2 Sons of the Fallen instead to handle their spear quota. And overall their average quality across both their armies was solid, enough to deal with the Orcs comfortably. And then they had enough left in the tank to come and deal with what was left of the human and elven armies as well. So now just sort of the business of wrapping up the line, the Mithril Guard coming in, more warriors of Khazad-dûm. Some Ironfoot Halberds attacking from the front. Of course these are Naru Na'aru Royal Guard, so they won't go down too easily. But ultimately, go down they will into the final 1,000 frames. And the Dwarves were probably sweating early on because it was looking like the Orcs and the Elves were going to attack them from both sides, which certainly would have resulted in their demise, but it also probably would have resulted in a comfortable win for the humans, who would have been able to sit on their hill and observe the destruction. Because the Elves and Orcs still would have been made to pay for that. The Dwarves, when they're on the defence, are capable of dishing out a pretty hefty amount of damage, as you would expect. Ironfoot Hammer Guard still alive. Everyone's favourite lore, the War Goats. There goes the Umbar General. As this fight begins to wrap up, Goats once again charging forwards. And the Naru Na'aru. The Pike's obviously strong. And it looks as though in the end, you just have this one guy with his sword and shield, the officer, which is a unit model which, you know, has the look of one of the most elite Numenorian infantry units, or Numenor's infantry units in .97, whose name escapes me, but obviously a lot of stylistic similarities can be drawn between Umbar and Numenor, as well as Arthedain and Mordor. But there we go. The end, and the Dwarves with a fairly decent chunk of their forces left. And in the end, a well-fought victory, and the most kills going to Baconfish. And again, I can only assume that was because of the crossbows. The Hammer Guard as well probably got a decent amount of kills as the battle wore on, and obviously the Blackrock Engineers. His ally also did very well. But also you have to understand that they were going up against the Orcs early on, which is obviously going to feed them a lot more kills than certain other factions will have. For example, the humans were going up against the Elves, so it makes sense that they had slightly less kills. Obviously the Orcs as well going up against the Dwarves, and they got a pretty raw end of the deal here, the Orcs charging right into that Dwarven line. Linden doing pretty well, again. Their javelins, their skirmishers, their artillery paying for themselves quite nicely. Lothlorien could have been a little bit more forceful when engaging Harad. I feel as though that would have left them with a little bit more in terms of manpower in the late game. Potentially that could have made a difference as well. Let's see what did the damage. Obviously 355 for the Blackrock Engineers, and just over 250 each for the crossbows, proving themselves to be the centre of the Erebor army, which certainly was more in a supporting role for the Khazad-dûm army here. A lot of Erebor's infantry was just sort of basic polearm units and spear units designed to help the more aggressive, more damaging Khazad-dûm infantry hold the line. Then we can see some pikes, which very mixed sort of fortunes here. I feel as though this one that got 222 kills was definitely going up against sort of more squishy Orcs, whereas the one that got 64 going up against tougher opponents. The Catapult doing decently. 923 kills on the Ironfoot Hammer Guard. Damn. Okay, so they did get a lot of kills over the course of the battle, getting a lot of kills against the Orcs, I would say. Late game, they were obviously looking a little bit more damage, but they continued into the late game, which just goes to show you that if you leave a cavalry unit unchecked, it can do horrendous damage. Obviously, the Hammer Guard is of a knight tier quality, just like stuff like the Noldorin Horse Sword. So yeah, I doubt any other unit on the field today got as many kills as that one. So yeah, I wasn't expecting that many kills from the Hammer Guard, to be honest with you. I was expecting around 300, not just over 900, near 1,000. But yeah, big thank you to Baconfish for sending that one in. And I think looking forwards, I'm not sure what the next one will be. I have a few in the pipeline which I could be doing. I will also be doing a slightly different type of video, which will just be sort of you'll know it when it comes out. It'll be a sort of something different to what I've done before. It's still Total War related, mind you, but it's not actually anything to do with sort of battle replays or actual gameplay as such. It's going to be a little bit more of a discussion format. I'm not really sure when that will come out. It will probably be out at the end of next week. I'm not so sure, but we'll see. But for the time being, I think the next couple of videos will just be more Reforged or replays from 0.96 that I've been given. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you will join me for whatever is next.